Chapter 2. What is the basis of Myers-Briggs personality typing? History and rationale. The Myers-Briggs is based upon the work of Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist whose influence rivals that of Sigmund Freud in its importance to the development of modern psychology. Jung's theory of psychological types recognized 3 criteria which determined a personality, each a dichotomy. Attitude. Introvert versus extrovert. Outward or inward focused. Functions. Sensing versus intuition. How do we take in information? How do we perceive? Thinking versus feeling. How do we process information? How do we judge? Jung believed that one of the 4 functions, sensing, intuition, thinking, or feeling, would emerge as primary, dominant. He called the judging dominant types rational because they are driven more by conscious processes of rules and order, and the perceiving dominant types irrational because they are driven more by unconscious processes of perception. Isabel Briggs Myers decided to represent this aspect, dominance of either a person's judging, T or F, or perceiving, N or S function, as the 4th criterion, J, judging, or perceiving. The J/P dichotomy does identify the dominant function, but not necessarily directly. The correlation is direct for the extrovert, but indirect for the introvert. The more accurate description of the 4th attribute is, therefore, an identifier for which of the 2 middle attributes, the perception, N/S, or judging, F/T, function is extroverted, implying that the other will be introverted. For the introvert whose type includes the J, then the first extroverted function will be his F/T, but his dominant function will be his S/N. If his type includes the P, it is just the opposite. His first extroverted function will be his S/N, but his dominant function will be his F/T. In addition to serving as indicator for whether a judging or perceiving function is dominant, the Myers-Briggs J and P carry their own observable, lifestyle descriptive traits, related of course to the function, whether a judging F/T or perceiving S/N function, to which they point as extroverted. In order to diagnose J or P, then, Myers-Briggs inventory seeks to learn from whether in my interactions with the world/others, I am more structured and decisive, or whether I am more relaxed and perpetually receptive. Note: there are those who disagree with the Myers-Briggs picture. Some completely overlook the attributes associated by Myers-Briggs with J and P, and state that J/P serves solely to determine whether the, quote, first extroverted function, as opposed to dominant function, is a judging or perceiving function. Further, there are those who disagree with the assumption that J/P points to the, quote, first extroverted function, believing that for the introvert as well as the extrovert, J/P points to your dominant function, which will, for the introvert, be introverted, and with all other functions being directed opposite. For the introvert, they will be extroverted, and much less pronounced. Even this is said to vary based upon the degree of introversion and whether the auxiliary, second most dominant, function has been consciously developed. Internet research, then, reveals some clearly heated argument on the interpretation of J and P. For the purpose of this book, we will stick with the Myers-Briggs interpretation. The Myers and Briggs Foundation explains its first preference choice, I/E, as, quote, favorite world, inner or outer. The second, S/N, as, quote, information, sensed directly or processed/interpreted. The third, T/F, as, quote, decisions, based in logic or in human factors. And the fourth, J/P, as, quote, structure, conclusion and closure, or information and options. The Myers and Briggs Foundation refers to each of its 4 dichotomies as preferences, although it does also refer to the preferences that make up the 2 central positions in the type, sensing, intuitive, feeling, and thinking, as mental functions. Every person possesses and uses each of these functions to some extent. My preferences, S and F, make up my function pair, SF. The function pair alone provides certain hints as to my personality. The first and last positions in the type, introvert/extrovert and judging/feeling, referred to by some sources as attitudes, determine the order of my mental functions, or functional stack, which includes all four of the mental or cognitive functions, N, S, J, and T. Preferred and lesser preferred, as well as the attitude, introverted or extroverted, of my first two mental functions, dominant and auxiliary. Associated with each personality type determined through the use of the MBTI, then, is a function stack consisting of each of the four functions, the two preferred followed by the lesser preferred. They are designated according to the order in which they are utilized by the particular Myers-Briggs type, as the primary or dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and fourth or inferior. The first two, primary and auxiliary, are given a direction or attitude based upon the, quote, attitude preferences as well. The Myers and Briggs Foundation does not associate attitudes with the third, tertiary, and fourth, inferior, functions. The MBTI function stack for ISFJ is SI, introverted sensing, FE, extroverted feeling, T, introverted thinking, N, extroverted intuition. As noted above, not every serious student of psychology agrees with the Myers-Briggs interpretation of personality type. It follows that not everyone will agree upon the arrangement of the functional stack. The functional stack and type of interpretation are essentially one and the same. Some schools of thought state that the attitudes of the tertiary and inferior functions will agree with the attitude of the auxiliary function, necessarily departing from that of the primary function, such that the stack reads SI, FE, TE, NE, but current thought seems to come to a greater consensus around alternating attitudes, such that the stack reads SI, FE, TI, NE. It is difficult for me to determine from reading the descriptions. You can find description for each function/attitude, SI, SE, NI, NE, FI, FE, TI, TE, whether my tertiary function, thinking, and inferior function, intuition, are introverted or extroverted. And since they are of lesser prominence in my personality, the MBTI functional stack mentioned above, SI, FE, T, N, will be assumed for the remainder of this discussion. Summary for ISFJ. To summarize, the Myers-Briggs assessment asks questions in order to learn from you what is your personality type. Based on your preferences, you will receive one each of four dichotomies: introvert or extrovert, sensing or intuitive, feeling or thinking, and judging or perceiving. Attitude: I, introvert, inward focus, or E, extrovert, outward focus. Collecting information: S, sensing, observation, or N, intuition, gut feeling. Information processing: F, feeling, emotions, or T, thinking, logic. Structure: J, judging, information processing, or P, perceiving, information collection. Sensing and intuition are perceptive, cognitive, mental functions. Feeling and thinking are judging cognitive, mental functions. Everyone has all four mental functions, but one from each dichotomy is preferred over the other. Your first and fourth type attributes also represent preferences, but they are not cognitive mental functions. Myers-Briggs refers to them as preferences of attitude, I/E, and structure, J/P, but sometimes they are both referred to as attitudes, which can be more intuitive since together, the first and fourth attribute or preference determine the attitudes, introverted or extroverted, of at least two, and according to some thinking, all four, preferred and non-preferred, mental functions, and in doing so, determine also the interpretation of the type. The ISFJ type indicates introvert, sensing, feeling, judging, with functional stack. Introverted sensing dominant, SI. Extroverted feeling auxiliary, FE. introverted thinking tertiary, T. Extroverted intuition fourth and inferior, N.